Hey, I had a lot of folks reach out and they were really happy with my introductory to AWS networking video. And so I asked what topic they wanted to hear talked about a little bit more. And surprisingly, folks wanted to learn a little bit about CloudFormation and how to do infrastructure as code. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at some of the basic networking components that we looked at in the last video and find out how we can code up some stuff in CloudFormation to make automation of those devices much easier. Hey everybody, what's good? What's going on? JB here, back with another CyberInsight video, and again, more AWS networking. So I think it's pretty exciting. There seems to be a lot of interest, especially in looking at this from a network engineering perspective. This might be the first time that you've been looking at networking components in AWS, and in talking about CloudFormation today, it might be the first time that you've looked at infrastructure as code. So pretty exciting stuff. We're doing this at a very fundamental level, so we're not going to get too crazy. Just hopefully giving you a little bit of information that allows you to go and dig into this a little bit more on your own, do a little bit of labs and stuff like that, and hopefully build that skill set. As always, with all of this information, I'm going to throw links down in the description for all the stuff that we cover. Before we hop over into the browser, make sure you do smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. And if you have any questions, throw those in the comments and we will definitely make sure that we hit those up. So just a real quick recap of what we talked about in the last video. We were talking about the fundamental networking components of AWS. So looking at regions and availability zones and VPCs, and then talking about the different types of subnets, public and private subnets that go within a VPC, the routing tables, the NACL, security groups, and then how we go about making sure that devices are able to access the internet, whether it's in a bidirectional method with an internet gateway, or if it's only outbound traffic with a NAT gateway. So when we covered all of this stuff, we went through and used the AWS console, so their web GUI. That was great. We actually used a VPC wizard, which is pretty cool. And you're able to do things in a relatively easy way, but the problem is that doesn't necessarily scale well. If you have to make the same types of configuration changes that we did in the last video, but you need to do it 40 times, clicking through a wizard and doing those types of things, or manually going through and spinning up all of these different types of EC2 components, it's going to take you a long time. So luckily, there's a few different methods that we can use to go about automating these types of configurations. One of the methods that we're going to be talking about specifically today is using CloudFormation, which is AWS's native tool to be able to do that type of scripting. There are some other methods out there, such as a tool set like Terraform. That might be something, if there's some interest, we could definitely go into that as well. But in essence, the main difference between a tool like Terraform and CloudFormation is Terraform can actually be used across different providers and different types of devices, even if it's not necessarily automation of cloud configurations, where CloudFormation is something that is native to AWS. And in doing that, it might have some additional benefits. Really, it just depends upon the environment that you're in and the tool sets that you might be familiar with or the folks on your team are familiar with. So everything that I'm going to be showing you here today is either going to be coming from some blog posts that I'm going to share in the description down below, or also some YAML files that I have that have been uploaded to my GitHub. Again, I'll throw those in the video description as well. So I found this blog by Jenna Peterson that kind of did an introductory to AWS CloudFormation. I think that it does a really good job of hammering home kind of some of the simple concepts that go along with this. So instead of reinventing the wheel, I figured it would just be good to go through, hit some of the high points of this, and then move into some actual configurations of our own that I'm going to spin up in my own AWS lab. So as I mentioned before, AWS CloudFormation is really about provisioning your different cloud resources with using infrastructure as code. So with a CloudFormation template, it allows us to define a whole bunch of things, including resources and different types of data tagging, to go about managing the collection of those resources together as what they call a stack. This allows you to have some type of version control over the different types of configurations that you're doing within your environment. And as I mentioned, this scales incredibly well because you're able to automate all of the specific configurations that you want to do across multiple devices within your AWS environment. If you were doing this manually and clicking through things, it would take you a lot longer period of time. So for the templates that we have when we're writing up things in CloudFormation, you can either do JSON or YAML. I completely agree with Jenna here. You definitely want to go with YAML. It's just a lot cleaner, a lot easier to read visually, and a lot easier to replicate. So within a AWS CloudFormation template, there's a few top-level objects that we're going to need to understand. Not all of these are required. In this blog here, she goes through and gives some examples of all of these. We aren't necessarily going to need to be doing that in the examples that we do, but it's good to understand what these are. Again, I'm going to put a link for this in the video description so you can go back and dig into this a little bit more. All of the AWS CloudFormation templates, you're normally going to see it start with a template format version. This is the only one that's acceptable. I do believe that this isn't an actual required value though, so while you do normally see that in these CloudFormation templates, you don't actually need to put it in there, but for standardization purposes, it makes sense. Then description, it's always good to have a description of what the template is doing. That way other people who are coming behind you have an idea of what you're doing. And there's some other things, some metadata. So this is objects providing additional information about the template. There's parameters. These are used for input parameters that you can pass to your template once you actually run the template through the AWS CLI. So we're going to end up using some commands to actually implement the template, and then you could have some key values that you end up passing at the point when you implement that particular configuration. There's rules that are used to validate the parameters that are provided. Mappings deal more so with key value pairs. So this could be stuff maybe like different types of crypto keys that you might want to be passed to the device during its creation. Conditions that control whether certain resources are created or not. Transform is customization of serverless applications. So from a networking perspective, this might not be something that we're really going to be dealing with. The one that is necessary for whatever we do is resources. So this is going to be defining the resources that we're creating and the necessary priorities that we want them to have. And then outputs allows us to return certain values based off of whatever it is that we created. So you can kind of think of this as like show commands that might provide back the name or certain information about different resources. I will say as you kind of go through doing this the first few times, it's definitely overwhelming the amount of data that you have here that you can choose from. There's a few different resources that you can use to go about finding the specifics of what all of this information is. I would say if you go and use this AWS resource and, well, it's under the AWS CloudFormation user guide. But if you have an idea of the type of resource that you want to create, so in our instance, since we're talking about networking stuff, it primarily falls under Amazon EC2. You can then identify the resource type and kind of the options that are available with that. So let's say we're talking about doing an AWS EC2 VPC. We're just going to create a VPC. Here they're going to give you the syntax of what this looks like, both with JSON and YAML. Remember, as I mentioned, probably want to go with the YAML. It's a little bit easier to understand and read, and you aren't going to get caught on not having the right braces or brackets at certain points. You don't need to worry about the commas and stuff like that. So YAML, definitely easier. You do need to make sure that the spaces are implemented there so everything kind of lines up, but I think it's a little bit simpler than using JSON. So if you kind of go through this, this is going to give you a whole bunch of different options of the different properties that are available here and what you can put in under those. Again, it's just going to take a little bit of time going through and seeing what you actually need to do. I would say start simple. That's kind of what I've done, and you'll kind of see at the CloudFormation templates that we're going to be implementing in this video. We aren't doing anything really crazy. But once you kind of understand these basic building blocks when you're building out these configuration scripts, then it's a lot easier to add things on as you iterate through that process. So really it's a learning process and finding out what is available and what works. So some terminology that we'll want to be familiar with: stacks. This is kind of like the implementation of all the resources that you defined. So when we go into CloudFormation, and we want to go and look at stacks that are already here. This is my lab environment. I already have some stacks here, and this is just showing pretty much the configurations of all the different elements that were created when we implemented this particular configuration change. So there's quite a bit here, and you can really go into it, but again, we're going to be starting simple. And the nice thing with this is it does kind of lay out how all of this ties together and the different resources that were created. And again, at scale, this works incredibly well. Change sets is another good terminology to know, where that allows us to preview what the changes will actually have an impact on in our environment. So here we kind of start going down all the examples of different things that we would have within our configuration. So remember, the resources is the one that is actually required. So you have resources, and then you have whatever your logical name is going to be for the resource. The type comes back to the actual resource that we're going to create. So if we remember going back here in this CloudFormation guide, you have all these different types of things that we can actually create. And then there might be some properties that we want to associate with this. Again, remember the properties that are specific to each individual type of element that we can create. You can go in and take a look and see what those are. So for instance, under creating a route, these are the different properties that are available to us. So once we kind of have it figured out what our configuration template is going to be, we're saving that as a .yaml file. And then we are going to run this AWS CloudFormation command. So it's AWS CloudFormation create stack, and then a -- stack name, then whatever we want that stack name to be. And then -- template body, and then the file that we are going to be creating, and then the region that you want to create it in. We can specify things within the configuration as well as where we want those to be created. Or if you don't do that, I think it will just default to whatever your default region is that you set up your AWS account in, specifically with the CLI configurations, which actually leads to a quick point that is worth mentioning, just because we didn't cover it. But if at this point you're like, hey, I want to do all this stuff, but I don't know how to actually do this through the CLI on whatever type of device that I have, there are some prerequisites that you need to do. Again, we're not going to do a 30-minute configuration of how to do all this stuff, but I am going to put this link in the video description. Pretty much you need to make sure that you have your AWS account up and running. You need to have an IAM user account that has the correct IAM roles to be able to configure things. You're going to need an access key and secret access key. You're going to get these, and you're going to need this for when you actually download and configure the AWS CLI component. So once you have all that set up, then the next step here is installing the latest release of AWS CLI version 2 on your computer. Depending upon what type of computer you're using, they have different steps for going about doing that, using curl to pull it down and installing it. And there's some stuff with the public keys and stuff like that that you're going to need to do. Then once you actually have it installed, you're going to need to do the configuration stuff. And this is where I was saying where you would mention what your default region is and the default output of how you want the data. So, and you put in your access key and secret access key here. And once you have that there, then you're good to go, and you can actually start doing CloudFormation stuff. And you can also run AWS CLI commands, which are great to be able to do searching for particular types of information about whatever you have configured in your environment. So back to a few of the other top level objects that we're talking about, parameters and intrinsic functions. Here, parameters are just things that you can identify. Again, you would end up passing to the template when you actually run the creation command for creating the stack. This part, we have a bucket name, which is going to be a string, an environment, which is also a string as well. You can also set default values here. So you see you have a dev test prod, And then under resources, you're creating a tag here with a key, and we're using this join function down here, which in essence is going to allow whatever you end up passing as a parameter. So let's say you did dev, would pass dev, and then it would add this hyphen and then environment. So you can kind of see down here in the CloudFormation command, these different parameter values that are being passed. We see this parameter value of dev would be passed. In essence, in the end here, we'd be tagging it as dev-environment. Again, these are things that are a little bit more advanced. You don't necessarily need to know how to do this right off the bat, but it's good to know, especially if you're using certain types of tagging in your environment to kind of keep things separate. Being able to do that is very helpful. I think I mentioned in the first video that tagging things allows you to search things very, very easily, group things. You can create rules based off of those tags, and it just makes things a bit cleaner. Talked about the mappings, and that was really dealing, with different types of keys. I think I'll probably show you an example of this in one of my YAML configuration files of just making sure that you're identifying your key, and then your key is maybe being passed to whatever your resource is for whatever type of encryption is being done on it. One thing I didn't necessarily point out, but you will see, so in here, the first thing was a create stack. That was the initial time that we were doing it. As you see, as she's kind of iteratively going through adding more and more things to her CloudFormation template, where she's doing an update stack. So something else that's kind of interesting is kind of these outputs. So I mentioned that's kind of like almost like a show command. You can end up using those outputs to determine what type of information you want to have displayed once this is all done. When you do that, though, it's not necessarily going to be displayed right after you run your create or update command. But when you go to do different types of show commands, specifically looking at the stacks, those outputs will be there and visible to you. So I think here she kind of shows if you do a describe stacks, and she's identifying the stack name, then you kind of see these output values here. And lastly, you have a delete stack. Again, you can do this through the CLI, or you can actually do this through the actual CloudFormation web GUI. We're going to do both, just so you can kind of see what it looks like on both ends of that. So again, great blog here. I thought this was pretty awesome. I'm going to throw it in the description, and you can dig into it a little bit more if you want to. So let's take a look at a few of my different CloudFormation templates. We're going to start off super simple and then add a few things to it. All right, so real basic with this, all we're doing here is creating a VPC. So I mentioned the AWS template format version. That has to be that if you're going to be using it. It's the only valid one. And then description of what we're actually doing here. So CyberInsight YouTube test VPC in US East 1. And remember, for me, this is what my AWS default configuration is going to be going to. So we have resources. The only one that we're creating is a VPC. So remember the type, we need to make sure we do that. You can name this whatever you want this to be. The nice thing with the way that these logical names are is we can actually reference them in other objects later on. We'll kind of see how that is in the next CloudFormation template that we look at after this. So properties that we're doing, we're just going to give it 192.168.0.0.16. Instance tenancy is default, enabling DNS host names, enabling DNS support. And the only thing that we're adding here is a tag for a name, and we're going to name it YouTube VPC 01. The output here is going to reference the data under the network VPC. So pretty much that should give us back the name, the logical name, and probably the VPC identifier. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the CloudFormation template. We're looking at it over in PyCharm, but I do have it over here on my Linux box that has the AWS CLI configured on it. So we have a few different things in here. So let's take a look at, make sure it's the same. And that's exactly what we were looking at over in PyCharm. So what we're going to do is that create stack command. So AWS CloudFormation create stack, the -- name, or -- stack name, YouTube my VPC, template body, and then since I'm in the same folder as where I'm running this command from, then we're just gonna pretty much just point right to that file. Okay, so that is running there. It should not take that long to do that. We should be able to actually see the CloudFormation described stacks. We can kind of see that this is the latest one, so it's going to be up at the top. I could have also used specific search just to find this by name, but we can see the stack name, when it was created, stack status, create in progress. So let's go over and take a look at this in the web browser. So let's go back to stacks. And we see that is now actually complete. I see the description here. If we click into this, let's go to events, and we can see what was actually done here. So we see it was initiated and then creating this VPC. We can see the resources that were created specifically by this. So we can see it is a VPC. We can see the ID for the VPC. I remember when I said that the outputs would be able to see those somewhere. So we can see here the only output that we had in that configuration file. So if we actually go back and take a look at that, we should be able to, if we go and run that same command again, we should be able to see the outputs here as well. Yep, and you see that the outputs are there identified. Cool. So as I mentioned, if we wanted to then get rid of it, we can just delete this. So we can go, all we need is a stack name and delete stack. Okay, now let's go back and see what that looks like on the CloudFormation page in the GUI. We can see that it's showing delete in progress. And we can see it is no longer there under active stacks. Now we can, if we want to see previous stuff, we can actually see failed stacks. Let me step back one here. Okay, so we can do failed stacks. We can show deleted stacks. So this is stuff just from me doing testing here in my lab. And the active ones are the ones here. So remember, when you actually do delete that stack, it actually is deleting all of the different resources that you created. All right, now let's look at one that's a little bit more advanced. We're going to be tying a few things together in this one. So here, what we're doing is, again, we're going to create a VPC. This is all the same as what we created before. But remember, since we just deleted this, this doesn't exist. Then we're going to be creating a subnet. Now, the interesting thing here is that there's properties where you're linking things back and forth. So here we have a VPC ID. Instead of actually having to write out whatever the specific VPC ID is, we actually can reference back to what this logical name is that we created here. So that's what I was mentioning in these CloudFormation templates. It's very easy to link back to other things, and oftentimes you do need to do that. So we're specifying the CIDR block. Again, this is going to be out of this, right? So it's going to be a /24 out of the total /16. The availability zone that we're going to be putting in. So remember, availability zone is a data center, a collection of data centers that are closely located together. Remember, subnets are availability zone specific. So you can't share a subnet across multiple availability zones. And we have a tag, and we're going to give it a name. YouTube public to US East 1A. Then we're going to create a routing table. And then we're going to reference the same VPC that we referenced up here. And we're going to give it a name as well. So with this tag, we're going to give it YouTube public to routing table. And then lastly, we're going to do a network route table association. So what we're saying is, hey, this subnet that we created here and this route table that we created here, we want to have an association made between the two of those. And then the outputs that we're going to have is going to be the ID for the VPC, the ID for the subnet, the ID for the route table, and then we're going to get the specific CIDR block used for the overall VPC. Really, we could end up having these be anything that fits into the data that would come out of any of these. So this might be information that you care about, you might not care about it, but it's more just showing all the different types of output that we could get from this. So let's move back over into the Linux workstation. Okay. Again, we can just verify this particular YAML file. And this should all look correct. And then we can run this CloudFormation command again to create this. My VPC subnet.yaml. There we go, and that should be spinning that up. So we can actually go back over to the CloudFormation area and see what we have going on. Go back to stacks, create in progress. And we can take a look at the events that we have going on here. And then we can continue to kind of just see how this is going. It's creating the VPC for it. And while we're doing this, I might as well point to some other AWS resources while this is going, some stuff that might help you. So if you're kind of wondering some examples of different templates, this is probably one of the better ways to learn as you're kind of going through these like simple things. They actually do have, AWS has a bunch of different templates for doing things. So you can kind of see what that would look like. So for instance, this is just going to create a single EC2 server in a VPC and then give it an elastic IP address and a security group. So we can actually see what this looks like, how they go about doing all this. And a lot of these here is just information that's going to give you different types of configurations you can do. So you can see like under the parameters for instance type, pretty much all of this stuff is allowing you to pick what size EC2 server you want to do, but it will default to the T2 small. You got mappings. Again, you might use these, you might not. And then we get into the resources. Again, you'll notice that this is actually in JSON, so this is a little bit more difficult to read than the YAML, but you'll see it's creating a VPC, it's creating a subnet, it's creating an internet gateway, it's attaching a gateway, it's creating a route table, it's adding a route. In this case, it's a default route that's pointing to the internet gateway. Again, you can change these names to whatever you want them to be so that they make sense in your particular environment. Then a subnet route table association, creating a NACL, and then even creating individual entries for the NACLs. So if we're allowing, let's say SSH inbound, right, is what this is doing here. Inbound, outbound, HTTP, inbound, outbound, response traffic, associating the subnet with the NACL. Here we're getting a EC2 IP address and a security group. So that was all kind of the networking portion of that. And then here is actually creating an individual server. Again, do you need to specify all of these things? You might not. You actually can do this with less things. It just depends. And I'll actually show you what one of mine looks like and how that came out after this CloudFormation stack finishes. But it's just good to know that these things are here. Again, I'll throw a link for that in the description as well. You can also find similar useful templates on GitHub as well. And in essence, this looks like it's pretty much doing something similar. It's creating a VPC and then having a NAT gateway. Public, private, subnet. Some routes. Some NACL entries. Yeah, and at that point, they aren't even associating or creating an EC2 instance. So it's pretty much just like the top half of that other one from AWS that we looked at. But these are definitely good things when you're wanting to learn these things to kind of look at and see how people are laying these out. I mean, with anything with code, as we've seen when we've done other videos on this, we're trying to not reinvent the wheel, right? We're trying to take stuff that somebody has already done that makes sense, that works, and kind of just adjusting it for whatever our particular purpose is. It's a great way to learn, and it's a great way to not frustrate yourself when you can't figure out how to get something to work. Let's go back and see how this is coming. So this whole thing is complete. So we created a VPC, created a subnet, created a route table, and did the association. We can see the particular resources that were created here. Again, VPC, subnet, route table association. And then remember, I had certain outputs that I wanted to see from that. And we can see what these are here. Again, we could run the same command back on the CLI, that show stacks command, and we end up seeing similar stuff. So I showed you before how we can delete that through the CLI. We could actually just delete it here as well. Just hit the delete button. And that's going to take all of the resources and shut them all down. Let's see, delete in progress. Let's see if that is almost done. Events. We can see that it's deleted the route table association, deleted the subnet. It's waiting for it to finish deleting the route table and then the VPC. All right, so while that's finishing up there, let me show you one more CloudFormation template that I have been working on. We're going to go back to PyCharm. So this one has a bit more stuff. So you see that I have some parameters laid out here. Remember, in the one that we were looking at from AWS, I had a whole bunch of different options. Here, I'm just specifying exactly what I want. And then I'm also specifying the AMI that I'm going to use. So in this instance, we're using the Linux, the Amazon Linux AMI, and then my key for crypto stuff, how I want that to be configured here. So here we're actually creating 3 different VPCs, one for production, one for testing, and one for dev. Giving them different subnets, giving them key values for their names. Then we're creating subnets for each of these. So we're creating the individual subnet, the routing table, and then the association of the route with the routing table. And then doing that for the other 2 subnets as well. Then we're creating an internet gateway. Remember, that's for stuff going outbound. And then attaching the internet gateway to the production VPC. Also created 3 different security groups and attached those to each of the particular VPCs that I wanted them to be in. And then created 3 different EC2 instances. So we had the instance type, then we assigned the particular security group to it. Then we also referenced a particular crypto key that I wanted, the particular software image, and the particular subnet that it needed to go in, and then gave it a name. Now, this wasn't everything that I needed to do in order to get all this stuff up and running. I mean, obviously there's a few other things. Need to get an elastic IP address and get that assigned to the particular server that I wanted to be public. Don't think that I did that in here. No, I didn't do an elastic IP address. So I still had to do that after the fact. And then also had to do some route table entries and stuff like that. But as you saw in some of the other CloudFormation templates that we just looked at, very easy to add those additional things in. I was kind of doing this from a learning perspective. I wanted to kind of iteratively add some more things. And then once I was done with this, I can kind of show you what that ended up looking like over in my AWS lab. Let's just move back over to the browser. And we also see that this stack is done and deleted. So let's just go, we're going to go to VPC. Yeah, we can see that we have the 3 different VPCs, a test, a prod, and the dev. And then we have the dev subnet, the prod subnet, the test subnet, route tables for those, test, dev, prod. We have the prod internet gateway. So if we go back and look at the route table for prod, that should have a default route pointed towards that. You'll see that some of the other stuff here, you have some routes going to the other VPCs, but those were pointed towards a TGW or transit gateway. We're going to cover that in some other videos soon, but pretty much a transit gateway allows different VPCs to be able to talk to each other and also allows us to connect back to on-prem data centers. So something like setting up a IPsec tunnel between a data center back to your cloud environment. If you're going to do that, then you're probably going to use something like a transit gateway. I don't think I have any elastic IPs. I guess I do. So yes, this one would be associated with that particular EC2 instance. So we can go and we can actually see the instances that I have. None of them are up and running at the moment. Everything is shut down. But you do see that I would have these 3 different instances that would be in that environment. All right, so I think that about wraps it up. We talked about using CloudFormation and infrastructure as a code. We looked at all of the different top-level objects that we need to have within a CloudFormation template. Talked a little bit about the process you need to go through in order to be able to use CloudFormation AWS CLI. The different things within the CloudFormation template and how we lay those out in JSON or YAML, ideally YAML, how those all kind of link back together. And then we went through and actually did a few different deployments with CloudFormation. So built out a VPC, built out a VPC, a subnet, a route table, and a route table association. And then we went over some other more in-depth CloudFormation templates where we did those types of things, but also looked at internet gateways, NAT gateways, and spinning up specific EC2 server instances. So I hope that's interesting. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to put all those links in the video description. So definitely go dig into that. Leave me some comments on some other AWS stuff that you're interested in learning about. I think this is all pretty cool stuff. I enjoy doing it, so hopefully it's helpful to you. Yeah, I think that's about it. Make sure you smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, all that other good stuff. Go get at it, and we'll talk soon. All right, bye.